For a little over a year of my study and preparation for ministry, I served as a hospital chaplain. First for a summer in New York City, and then for about 10 months in Fort Worth. When not responding to emergencies and referrals or requests for a chaplain, I did rounds. Now, I much preferred being present when I knew I was wanted or needed. Doing rounds on the units to which I was assigned, or in the case of Fort Worth, the whole hospital, takes a different kind of courage and centeredness. When I knocked on those doors and walked into the room, encountering people in varied states of vulnerability in life, I never knew what to expect. Sure, my census list said knee replacement, or cancer, or COPD. But that told me nothing about what was going on with the person and what kind of support they might need from a chaplain. That I had to discover for myself. Serving as a chaplain, especially in Texas, I was used to patients I visited expecting prayer. That was the assumed way of concluding the visit, and they knew exactly who they wanted to pray to, and they knew that I was the person to do it. So it surprised me when, occasionally, I would encounter a skeptic in the room. When I offered prayer as one way that I, the chaplain, could support them, would you like for us to pray together? Either a family member or the patient would ask, why? It didn't happen often, and so the first time it caught me off guard. Why? Why pray? I probably bumbled through a response the first time it happened. I don't remember what I said. I blocked it out. But I know that after some reflection, my response was, because it's a reminder that you're not alone. Because it might be comforting or calming. Because it's a chance to voice anything that you want to voice about what's going on and what you're going through. Why pray? This is one of the questions that you submitted for our summer worship series. What does prayer mean for us as Unitarian Universalists, you wondered? And how do we navigate this question of to whom or what do we pray? Now, to be honest, I was the skeptic until a few years ago. I was raised Unitarian Universalist, and prayer was not part of my community or family's practice. It wasn't until I entered seminary and was taking a first-year class on spiritual disciplines for religious leaders that I was faced with this question for my own life. Why pray? What does this mean to me? And it was my now wife, at the time a seminary classmate, who said to me, Beth, prayer doesn't change God or anyone else. Prayer changes the person who prays. Of course, I thought, that makes sense. Pray not because God expects you to, or because your church tells you to, or because it gets you what you want for yourself or others. Pray because it changes you, and the impact naturally ripples from there. Like any spiritual practice, prayer works on the one who practices it. It doesn't change other people or situations necessarily, but it does change how we relate to those people or situations. One of you asked a more specific question about prayer, which was, what does prayer mean for unbelievers? In other words, is it possible for those who don't identify with any particular religion, or perhaps those who don't believe in any God, to pray? It's as if Czesław Miłosz is speaking to this exact question in the beautiful poem that you heard Paul read earlier. He begins the poem, "You ask me how to pray to someone who is not. All I know," he writes, "is that prayer constructs a velvet bridge." His poem suggests that despite our uncertainty, something draws us to this act of prayer. Everyone praying is gathered on that bridge, in his imagery, connected to one another through the invisible strands of compassion and of shared humanity. And this sense of connection to a larger body transforms us, as he describes it. He says that prayer is really about that bridge and all of us who are on it, not what is on the other shore or whether there even is another shore. Prayer in its many forms does not require a belief in God. There are plenty of religions in which God is not the central focus of prayer, and yet people still pray. Think of prayer flags as an example. Tibetan Buddhists hang strands of cloth flags with mantras and images on them to blow and eventually disintegrate in the wind. The flags are not understood as carrying prayers to any gods, but instead they spread prayers for peace and compassion carried on the wind. A couple years ago, during our church's Year of Compassion, our year-long spiritual practice involved prayer flags. Many of you spent time here in worship or in Chanting Hall or out in the courtyard writing your prayers on strips of fabric, which you then tied to ropes that were hanging from the prayer flag garlands. They blew in the wind, many of them disintegrating over the course of the year, the wind carrying your prayers out into the world. This practice we invited you into represented how I understand prayer. It is both an inward and an outward process. Prayer centers us and it connects us to that which is beyond ourselves. When we wrote on those strips of fabric, we listened to our own feelings and yearnings and hopes. And then as we wrote them on the fabric strips and shared them with the community, it helped us be connected to others. And this is what prayer does. Whether it's individual or communal practice, it begins with a movement inward to listen and then moves outward to connect. Everything I have experienced in prayer and read about prayer suggests that it has a collective element. Certainly when we pray together as a community, it can help us feel more connected to each other. But even when we pray alone, we can feel ourselves connected on that velvet bridge that was in the poem. All over the world, in almost all traditions, prayer is being practiced in a multitude of forms. And there's something about knowing that people all over the world are praying as we are, which helps us feel part of a larger and more powerful whole. This experience can't help but change us, those who pray. And that is one reason to do it. Now, you may be able to tell by now that I am a proponent of prayer. But I'm not about to tell you how to do it. Prayers are words or actions that come from the heart and express a feeling or an intention or a hope. While there is value in unison prayers, for example, the prayers of atonement that we say each year around the Jewish High Holy Days, there must be a deeper, more internal level to it, a process of making it your own and feeling the meaning of what you're saying for yourself. Prayer is spiritual truth-telling that connects us with that which is beyond ourselves. Every sermon I write is a prayer. It expresses my truth, the truth that I see in this community and my hopes for all of us. Engaging in justice work is a prayer. It puts into action what we believe to be true and embodies a vision of the world that we dream of. Your ministers and worship associates pray before we begin worship to express our hopes and blessings for this hour. And we pray together in the worship service, as we have today, to speak our truths and intentions, to hold one another in loving care as we go through the joys and the sorrows of life. All of these examples involve spiritual truth-telling, connecting us with that which is beyond ourselves. It's a practice of naming and voicing these truths that can change and strengthen us. Now, you've asked many questions of us, your ministers, this summer. And now my question for you is this. How do you voice your truth and aspirations and connect with something beyond yourself? However you do this, there are many different ways. May it be your prayer. The way you do it will take different forms depending on whether it is a prayer of gratitude or a lament, or a prayerful wish. And it doesn't matter if you believe in God or not, whether you know what lies on the other shore or whether there even is another shore. If you believe in the potential for transformation that comes from voicing truth and aspirations, prayer may be a meaningful practice for you. The challenge is to open ourselves, to be open to where it takes us. Traditional prayers, perhaps the prayers that some of you learned as children, tend to follow the formula of, God, please give me this or do that. There's a very specific outcome in mind, and the prayer petitions God for this to come true. This is why I love the work of Kathleen Norris, author of our first reading entitled Answered Prayers. She writes about this experience of visiting a neighbor in pain, showing up at her doorstep on the day her divorce was final, and being invited in too far, beyond her comfort zone. But then she realizes it had to be like a prayer. We can't ask for what we know we want, she writes. We have to ask to be led someplace we never dreamed of going, a place we don't want to be. We'll find ourselves there one morning, opened like leaves, and it will be all right. Norris reminds us that prayer is not asking for what you think you want, but asking to be changed in ways that you can't even imagine. We don't always get the answer that we expect in prayer, or when we knock on a neighbor's door, or when we step into a patient's hospital room. This is what is both frightening and wonderful about prayer. It's not surprising to me that this topic came up among your questions this summer, because it's probably one of the most frequent inquiries that I get as a Unitarian Universalist minister. Prayer is part of so much of what we do as a church. Our worship, our classes for children and youth and adults, our service and justice work. Your ministers not only pray every Sunday here, but we preach about prayer at least once or twice every year. And yet we as a people sometimes seem to struggle with it. I wonder if the reason that we continue to struggle is because prayer is both frightening and wonderful. I know that many of you want to pray, are yearning for a practice like it, but maybe don't know how to do it in a way that feels authentic to you. Many in this church were raised either with no concept of prayer or a very limited and prescribed one. The language of spiritual truth-telling does not flow easily from the heart and the tongue. And then we find ourselves in a UU community, and as we sometimes do, we begin to overthink it. Yes, the challenge is to be open to where the practice of prayer takes you. It may be frightening, it may be full of wonder, but if we enter it without preconceived notions and simply listen, we will likely end up someplace we didn't expect, and it will be all right. The Reverend Jack Mendelson, the late Unitarian Universalist minister, once wrote, "Prayer is an effort to reach deep and to reach out and to become what we would like to be and need to be and ought to be. Proper prayer is not a petition to escape realities. It is an effort to face up to realities, to understand them, to deal with them, to grow in courage, strength, and in faith." So why pray? Because it is a practice unlike any other, in which we articulate what is, what we yearn for, and what can be. We share what is on our hearts and let it blow in the wind like a prayer flag, and we ourselves are often changed. So my prayer for you today is that you will find some practice for spiritual truth-telling that connects you with that which is beyond yourself. May it lead you to unexpected and wonderful places, and may you grow in courage, in strength, and in faith. May it be so. Amen.